Early intervention typically refers to services aimed to address developmental delays or disabilities early on to minimize their impact on a child's development. These services are provided to children usually from birth to age 3. But what happens after kids turn 3? The answer: preschool services. Today's guest is here to explain more about those services to us. So, OG family, we are back. Welcome to another episode of The Opportunity Gap. On today's show, we're talking about preschool services. We have a special guest joining us, Elisa Lundy. Elisa is a special education itinerant teacher. She works in preschool classrooms in Brooklyn and Manhattan. Welcome to the show, Elisa.
Hi.
Hey. So thinking about, we're recording right now and summer break is on the way. For those of us that work in schools, summer break is right there. What are you looking forward to for your summer?
Well, I'm actually retiring at the end of June, so
the summer's congratulations!
Thank you.
All right.
The summer's a little unpredictable, but we'll see.
Retire? Wow. So, what are your plans for retirement? You don't know yet?
I don't know. Didn't want to. I've always been busy and worked my whole life. I didn't want to immediately fill the space with other stuff, so I'm just gonna kind of attempt to chill for a bit and see what rises as a priority. I'm still going to be working in the school that I'm in now, but on a consulting basis. So that's something.
Got it. Maybe some podcasting in your future.
Oh, well, okay.
All right. So, Elisa, I'm just interested to hear, again, retirement is amazing. I mean, that's an accomplishment in and of itself. So thank you for all the service you've put in for the teaching that you've done. But just wondering, can you tell the listeners about your teaching journey? And how did you get to this point?
Yeah, I guess I should say that I first got interested in special education back when I was in junior high school. And They had teams of people working with a sibling of one of the students in my class. And I joined that team because he had to have certain therapies periodically throughout the day. And then when I went to college, I majored in education, but mostly psychology. And then I wanted to work with parents and families, but I thought I needed a little more child experience under my belt. So I wanted to teach first and get to know children. So I did my master's in early childhood special education. Okay. And I became a classroom teacher and then a director of a preschool program. And then after my own children, I was a SEIT, which stands for Special Education Itinerant Teacher, where you work with individual child in a given classroom. It could be anywhere. When I started teaching, I went from the Upper West Side to East New York.
Wow.
It was quite a commute there. Yeah, I did a lot of reading. And then I've been a SEIT for the bulk of my career. And then I'm now the assistant director of Rivendell School. And my responsibilities are mostly for the supervision of SEITs and our evaluation team.
Got it. So it seems like from early on, like you had some foundational experiences that kind of pushed you into building this entire career around special education and specifically like early education.
Right. It's always been in early childhood. Yeah.
So thinking about, all the things that you've done in your career, what's the most rewarding part of your job?
Oh, that's a tough call because I want to say first of all, that it's when you see the progress that a child makes. It's just so fulfilling. But even when it's not just that, because even when a child's progress is very incremental, there's still that privilege of being that close to someone and to knowing them that intimately, and for families to allow that, and every child being so different. I love the beginning of the school year where it's a mystery. You want to figure out who is this child and what are we doing here? That's my favorite part. So
I know, right? And I'm an administrator in a high school, so I don't get to work with the babies, even though they call them babies still, but they're babies in big bodies. But, you get to work with the younger ones, and I'm sure it must be so cool to just see how they develop so quickly. Right? When they're little, it just seems like they just get so big so fast. And that must be such an amazing experience.
It's very fun.
So really, let's get into the crux of having you on because your expertise is so vast. But I think in this specific area, this is something that a lot of our listeners have been asking for, just more information. So, I was doing some preparation for today's episode and I started reading up a lot more on early childhood services. And I found a lot of similarities, right, between these types of services, and some would call preschool, as you said, in New York, they're called preschool. In Pennsylvania, we call them early childhood services or early learning. But just thinking about the similarities between these services and early intervention. So, for our listeners, can you differentiate between the two? Like, what is the difference between preschool services or early learning services and early intervention?
On the surface, the services are pretty similar. I think early intervention is for children 0 to 3, and preschool services are for 3 to 5. But
Okay.
the main difference is early intervention is a medical model, and it's sponsored by the Department of Health. And preschool services are sponsored by the Department of Education, and they are school-based services.
Interesting. So, school-based versus like the medical world is one of the big differences.
Yeah.
Got it.
So in early intervention, they can address all different kinds of things that are going on with the child. And in preschool, they're primarily concerned about what's interfering with their ability to take advantage of the curriculum in the classroom.
Got it. Got it. So thinking about that, I'm just wondering for, my own knowledge as a parent, obviously like we're teachers. And so my wife and I were very much the people that read all the books. We had all the books before
Oh, yeah.
the child was born, and we had the American Pediatric Association, that giant handbook that they have, or what to expect when you're expecting. We had that one. And, we would kind of tick off the different developmental points that the kids should be hitting as they were progressing. And so I'm thinking, as, those of us that have gone through that, when I think back, I'm not sure if I would have known like if and when I needed to seek out any of these services. So just from your own experience, what do you think in terms of parents navigating when they should seek them out?
I often have parents talk to me about, feeling bad that they didn't do something sooner. And I keep telling them they're right along with the actual principles of special education, which is development. You have to let a child develop. You don't want to just jump on everything and micromanage everything, your child is doing.
Yeah.
You want them to have a chance, and you want to see if it's developmental, and it will change over a certain period of time. And at some point then, if it's not changing, and your teachers are concerned, and you're seeing that the things that you would typically do as a parent aren't helping the situation, then it's time to think about getting an evaluation, not necessarily to get services, but to get answers.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like the idea of not just going straight to I need something, but more seeking out help from somebody that specializes in it so that you can figure out, is this a thing or is it not?
Right.
That makes a lot of sense.
A lot of parents go to their pediatrician too, who,
yes,
who they vary in their responses, but yeah.
And again, the pediatrician is really the first point of contact for a lot of us. And, knowing that relationship is so, so important. Yeah. Having that communication with the pediatrician is really incredibly fundamental.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go into your expertise, right? So I asked you a little bit about early intervention, but I want to really hear about your expertise related to preschool services. So can you describe for the listeners and for myself, what do these services often look like? What would the services you've specialized in, what would it look like? Can you give us some concrete examples?
Well, as I said, the Department of Education here operates on the federal law of least restrictive environment. So they want to give as few services as possible because kids are supposed to be educated as close to the norm as they can manage. So
Hmm.
they have certain criteria that they start with saying, is the child okay in his classroom? If not, then what about if we add a related service, which is speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, or counseling are the related
Okay.
services. And if that's enough, good. And if not, the next one is a SEEIT, which is a master level special education teacher who goes into the classroom and works with the child and the teachers in the room and tries to bridge the gaps. Beyond that, there's an integrated classroom, kids with services and kids without learning together with a general ed teacher and a special ed teacher. And beyond that, there are special classes of varying size for kids who need a smaller, more intensive environment.
Got it. So thinking about all the different ways it can vary, and Elisa, you've been in the classroom for a number of years, and this is the last one.
Maybe not.
But thinking about all the time that you spent providing preschool services in your own classrooms, can you give us just some things that parents should be looking for? Like, what if they walk into a classroom like yours? Uh, what kind of things should they be looking for as examples of services that are really helpful and are going to work?
Are you talking about a parent who's trying to find a school that would work for their child? Or
Yes.
yeah. Well, I'm particularly partial to relationships between the adults and the children. So I like to see,
Okay.
I think most learning comes from that trusted relationship. So I would be most looking at the relationship between the children and the teachers, how welcome parents are, that kind of thing. But in the
Mm.
classroom, it varies so much because you've got the child's goals and what he's supposed to be addressing. You've got the classroom culture. You've got the parents' desires. You've got everything to consider. So the services can look differently, but there are a few things that are foolproof, I think, if you're looking for a classroom. One is really clear schedule and expectations, not too many transitions going from one thing to another, where kids
Hmm.
have to stop what they're doing. They hate that, but they don't like that.
Yeah.
It makes trouble.
No, but having like predictability like that, I say the same thing at the high school level
Yeah,
too. So, yep,
absolutely. I
I
think
agree with that.
visuals help a lot.
And especially for little ones,
Oh,
like they
yeah.
they need to see these things.
Yeah.
It's a great reinforcement.
And then I think opportunities for small groups. Some kids do so much better with
Mm.
just one other child or two other children. So not everything with everybody doing all the same thing at the same time. Those are,
Got it. So seeing like multiple stations in a classroom is something that I would definitely be looking for
yeah,
as well.
yeah.
Thinking about preschool services, and again, I'm talking to you, it's bringing me back to when my own kids were that age. You know, the development of their social, emotional, and physical development is so crucial in that 0 to 5. I don't know the exact statistic, but it's one of the highest and fastest times that your brain develops throughout the course of your life. And so all of these things, social, emotional, physicals, it's all happening so fast. Thinking about that, how can preschool services really help to foster all of those things, social, emotional, physical development? How can high quality preschool services help develop those, in your opinion?
Well, I think all of that contributes to your social well-being, right? Being physically active, engaging in things that you are of interest to you, having the opportunity to do
Hmm.
it with other people. And I would hope that special services would work that way, using things that the child is interested in, pulling in other children who have the same interests, um, adding physical components. You can't have children sitting all day long in preschool.
No, you
No,
cannot.
you could
No, you
try, but you
cannot.
wouldn't be successful. So, throughout everything you're doing, and then you're modeling a relationship with children. That's what I talked about, the importance of relationship with the adults in the room. You're modeling what it looks like to have a social relationship where you can talk about your feelings or what you did or what you want or what made you mad.
Thinking about your own career, Lisa, you've gotten to see so much over the course of the time you've worked in different schools. I'm wondering, like, what have you noticed as some of the larger changes that have happened in preschool services since you started to now?
That's a good question. I think they have become more child friendly. Not everybody do everything at the same time. I think the current kind of buzzword is neurodiversity, and I think the awareness of that is going to have a big payoff, because we used to talk
Yes.
about learning styles, but it's more than that. It's the way children think and the way they can receive information. It used to be every child had to sit crisscross, at circle time, and now they're kind of letting kids, as long as you're paying attention, you can lie on your belly if you want to, and I think that all of that is a change that I've seen for the good.
I've just finished, or I'm going to finish my 20th year in education, right?
Wow.
And so over that time period, things have they've changed. We talk a lot about the stigma of special education that was far more prevalent earlier in my career to now. And just the ability for our families to have so much information at their fingertips for how to advocate for their children and how to make sure that things in the classrooms are going the way that they should be going. I'm wondering, to your point, thinking about the changes that have been happening for the good, have you noticed technology making an impact at all on preschool services?
In preschool, in my experience, we don't really use technology too much, with one exception, and that is children who are on assistive technology. So it's a talking device that they can use so that they can communicate with their friends and teachers. And those have been really evolved so much over the past few years, from something that was quite cumbersome and difficult to now it's almost like using an iPad. So that has been a big change, and technology, and all the other children in the class want to use it too. So it's have two so that they can have a friend talk to them on it, even if the other friend doesn't need it.
So families listening, Elisa just brought up a really good point. Thinking about your own process if you are in the process of trying to gather preschool services, one thing that you can ask about is the availability of assistive technology. It's something that is prevalent, across the country, and in many classrooms. It can help with language development. It can help with tactile skills. It can help with fine motor skills. Like, there's so many different things that can be aided with assistive technology. It's something that you should definitely be looking out for. Going back to the parenting side of things, right? You and I are both parents, and I remember that a lot of my friends and I were having kids at the same time, right? And inevitably, we would compare a little bit. Like, oh, my son started walking when he was 12 months old, and my daughter started crawling when she was 6 months old. And wait, she's not crawling yet, and she's 15 months. Like, what's happening here? And, I remember the books would tell you these certain times that these things should be happening. And we had this phenomenal pediatrician, Dr. Carton. Shout out to Dr. Carton at Villanova. She would always talk us off the ledge and say, listen, your child's going to develop in the way that they are ready to develop. They have their own timeline. But it'd still be really hard not to compare. And so thinking about this particular situation where this is just beyond the normal development of a child, like, this is where things that are needed are a little bit extra. In your opinion, Elisa, what does developing on time look like? Is there one answer, or does it depend on the child? Like, was Dr. Carton wrong, or
No,
what do
not
you
wrong.
think?
Each developmental milestone has its own bell curve of when it occurs. For example, speech has probably the widest bell curve, because kids can start talking. I don't know right off the top of my head, but something like from 10 months to 2.5. It's a big, wide range. Others have a much smaller range. That's one reason why the evaluations are so helpful, because they can tell you if it's out of range. And I think once you get in the out of range area, sometimes kids still need a little more time. There might be a family history of late development. So I think the answer to that is check your own Dr. Carton, to see what's
kind
happening.
of check with your doctor. And again, inevitably, a lot of us are going to compare. But I think, as Elisa's saying, there's so many different variables involved in how kids develop. So there isn't really a specific timeline. But I always tell people, trust your intuition, right? Like you, as a parent, for whatever reason, you have that child and that completely changes your mentality. That caretaker kind of mode just kicks in and your intuition tells you, like, maybe I do need to get this checked out a little bit more.
I
And that's
agree.
where checking in with the pediatrician is there.
Yeah, I agree. And evaluations will just get you the answers. It doesn't commit you to anything. It's free of
Exactly.
charge. And we see all the time kids who, they're close to 3, they're not talking. You do the evaluation and you find out that their language really still is within normal limits. But if you tested them 6 months later, it might not be true
Hmm.
because 4-year-olds,
Yeah,
as you know, talk way more than
they do.
3-year-olds. So, at least you have the answer for then, and they'll tell you if you should come back or if you're over worrying.
Yeah, no, that's very true.
And your show
Um,
is called The Opportunity Gap, right? And that's one of the things that really, I think, addresses that because these evaluations through the Department of Education are free to everyone. And you find out early if there are gaps that need to be addressed, so it's, yeah.
you must have been reading my mind because that was going to be my next
Oh,
question.
okay, sorry.
No, not sorry. No, that just means we're going exactly where we should go. Yes, the show is called The Opportunity Gap. And, the basis of the show is really about addressing the intersectionality between special education services across the board and kids of color, kids and families of color. Knowing your experience, and that's why we wanted you on here specifically because you've worked in one of the most diverse cities on the planet. And so you've had this wide just experience and spectrum of people that you've come in contact with throughout your career. And I'm wondering, knowing what you know about preschool services, are they accessible to families of color? Like, do you feel like they have been accessible? And you already answered the question about the cost. It's free, y'all. It's free. It's all free. We'll say one more time so everybody can hear it in the back. It is free. But just realistically thinking about the time that you've spent in the city, Manhattan, Brooklyn, East New York, everywhere, are these services accessible to people of color?
They are. When a parent contacts the Department of Education, they send them a packet with a list of evaluation sites. Then they can
Mm-hmm.
make their own choice. And not only are the evals free, but the services are free also. Just throw that in there. So when we get a call from someone looking for an evaluation, we have no idea. We ask them what school they're in because we have to send people to observe, but we have no idea what color, who we're talking to, what their income is, what their job is. That's never asked in the eval. They get the same evaluations. Everyone does. Everyone gets the same meeting. Everyone gets the same services. We've sent CET teachers to every kind of school on the spectrum in every kind of neighborhood. So,
Do you find that certain demographics access the services more than others? Meaning, do you find that maybe wealthier districts access it less or more, or have you seen any difference in
I
that?
don't really know how to answer that because it's also weighed off with wealthier districts might also seek private services more, or they're in schools that don't allow services in sometimes. So I really couldn't answer that. I know I've been in various districts in Brooklyn. Yeah, I don't.
Wait, so there's also private services that can be acquired as well?
Yes, people who don't want to go through the Department of Education or they don't want a full eval, they know it's speech, for example. Yeah, you can pay yourself for services. There are clinicians all over.
Interesting. And I wonder how that impacts the quality of service if people think, or maybe it doesn't impact it.
I don't think so because most of the providers that I know anyway do some private and some public. So it's the same providers.
Got it. But they're just choosing to pay out of pocket as opposed to
Yeah.
accessing what
Yeah,
the
to pay
department
out of
has.
pocket or because situations like it's a 10-month service and they want to get things during the summer for their children, which are not mandated by the Department of Ed. They might pay for it privately or different
So the
situations.
services only occur during the school year? It's not a summer
They're
thing
either
that
10-month IEPs, September to June, or 12-month IEPs. The summer is considered a separate service. So you're
okay.
not automatically eligible for it unless there's certain diagnoses, or children who are having severe issues who would automatically get it. Otherwise, providers write justifications to say why they think they would need it during the summer, why it would be detrimental to miss the time. It's
Interesting.
because it's based on a school model. School model, they don't get summer services, unless you really are behind, right? Same
Right.
idea. But preschool, it doesn't work that way. Preschool is generally 12-month program. Kids send
Exactly.
us,
Yeah, and that's why I was wondering, because having 10-month and then having that gap
yeah,
could be very detrimental to families, especially after having services
yeah,
and then having it cut off
right. And when the
for that
child is in the same
amount of
school, they
time.
just feel abandoned, I think. But so that is a little bit of a mismatch. But anyway,
Thinking about, going back to the cultural differences side of things, my mother is African American, my father is Cuban. So I grew up in a multi ethnic background. My wife is Caucasian. And so my kids have like a mixture of everything. And there's definitely like cultural differences in the way that people choose to raise their children, right? Like just it's stated, there are definitely things that are similar, but across all the cultures, whether it's in Cuban culture, there's certain things that we did, and in Black culture, certain things we did. My wife and her Scottish culture, certain things that she does. I'm wondering from your experience, knowing that you got to go all across Manhattan, all across Brooklyn, thinking about that, how do these cultural differences, like, how did it impact the work that you did in providing some of these childhood services? Like, how did you navigate having to work with all these different types of cultures and different ways of rearing children?
well, first, it's fun to learn about them because they're, in terms of cultural differences, I don't think there's any wrong way. It's just different.
I love that you said that. I love that you started by saying I wanted to learn.
Yeah,
I'm sorry to cut you off. That just really, I love to hear that when people say that.
that's
But go
okay.
on.
I often tell the teachers I supervise, if you're not learning, you're doing it wrong. Go back and change because something's not right. Um, and you need to understand them as a teacher because when you're asking parents to work with you on strategies, it has to be something they can do and will do.
Mm,
Not something that's so like, I'll never do that. And there's certain things, like if you just take a simple example like eye contact, which a lot of kids will have as a goal, especially kids who are on the autistic spectrum or other things. In some cultures, it's impolite to make eye contact with an adult if you're
yes.
a child. And
Yes.
so making the child do it or asking the parents to help with that is not going to work. That's all.
And that takes having like the knowledge of the different cultures to understand those nuances.
Yeah.
And so going back to what you said, like that's a learning that you have to do your homework before you start working with different people.
Or you have to build a trusting enough relationship that they will tell you. Like to say to a parent,
Mm,
this is what I think he needs. Does that work for you? Does that fit? Is that something you can do? Why not? Or why? To open that kind of dialogue where you can really talk together about what you can do as a team for that child.
Did you find any resistance to some of the services that you provided over the years?
I think initially sometimes parents are a little worried, but mostly by the time they've gotten to this point, they are happy to have people who will work with them and help them figure out what's going on. I haven't,
Mm,
I work with people with good intentions. I think parents know that. I don't know what it would be like otherwise, but I think the first thing we try to do is to really build that relationship because without that, you're not going to be able to work with families. They're going to be resistant because they don't know who you are and you're asking them to entrust their child to you. It's a big ask.
yes, it is. It is. And for all of us that are in education, that's such an honor that we hold, being able to work with the most important people in a family's life.
Yeah.
So I agree with you 100%. It's a really big responsibility, but I think it's one of the best ones we can have.
Yeah, and I think, it's so sometimes it's not uncommon, you probably hear it too, that the child is so different at home than at school. So the parents may not be seeing the child that you're seeing in the school. And
Right.
both are right. I'm
It's
different at
true.
home than at work,
Yeah, no, that's
and
very true.
children can be too. And that it's not an interesting question as to who's right. The interesting question is, how does the child perceive that? And can we tell him that? Like, wow, you're really different at home than at school. What are you thinking? Do you feel happier at home? Is there something at school? Or do you feel, sick? Whatever it is. But that's the more interesting question is why is that true? And is it okay?
So true. So true. Elisa, I could talk to you forever, but I do have one last question before we close out. I'm just thinking about summarizing all the things we've talked about, the differences between early intervention and preschool services or early learning services, how to go about identifying things that are happening in classrooms where services are being provided, thinking about the wealth of diversity for cultural differences and how those impact the work that we all do. I'm wondering, if nobody listens to anything that we said, but they have to walk away with this is how I go about getting services. Do you have any clear steps and or recommendations for parents or families that are seeking out preschool services? If you have any resources or any specific steps, that'd be really helpful.
Well, in New York, anyway, the step is to contact your Department of Education school district and ask them for an evaluation site. That is the first step. I don't think anybody wants to give services that are not necessary. And I believe firmly that families want what's best for their child, and so do these people who are working with them because they're invested. And I know there are lots of jobs you could do if you were only interested in making money. Education typically isn't one of them.
Not one of
And
them. Not one of them.
mostly people are here because they love this work and they really care about the
Mhm.
kids. So do what parents need to do what they need to do in order to be able to trust people. But when they can, then really, work with them, take the responsibility for explaining everything you know about your child, because that helps everyone to know what they like, what they don't like, what they say about things, what they did over the
Yes.
weekend, all of that stuff
Yes.
helps. And in the meetings too with the Department of Ed, when you're getting services, just be honest about really what's worrying you. I think sometimes parents come in thinking they need like a legal strategy. And I often say, just be the parent, let it show and bring that child to life, because evaluations can be good, but it's words. They need to change that child into a hologram, fill out so that the people who are thinking about services know them better.
Yes. Any specific parent groups or family sites or anything that you'd recommend people check out, even if they're based in New York or outside of New York?
Well, here it's interesting because sometimes I talk to parents. There are lots of parent blogs and that kind of stuff where parents talk to each other and talk about where is good and where is not good and things like that. But I don't know that those can vary, as you know, depending on who's writing them and who's
Yes.
adding to it. The Department of Education here actually has a really good website, which you can find out everything. They describe each service, each step of the way. And the other group that has great information is called Advocates for Children. And they
Okay.
also outline the whole process. They tell you how to write that first letter to the DOE to get the package. And they have been really helpful to parents. They run workshops and things. They have a lot of resources as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I just have to say again, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on and just tell us your story, tell us about your expertise. I learned a lot. I know I've had my own kids, but I'm high school based in the education world, so I'm always learning more about what it's like to provide services early on.
Yeah.
I do believe that if we can as families and as educators really focus on the beginning, it can be transformational for the rest of the journey.
Right.
So
Right.
I just appreciate the work that you've done. And, just on a personal note, anytime I come in contact with an OG or somebody like yourself that's been in the game for so long, I just want to give you your flowers and say thank you for all the work you've done. Honestly, like it means a lot to me to come in contact with people that have dedicated their lives to this work, and knowing that you're coming up on retirement, just good job. And thank you for doing the work that you've done.
Well, thank you. And thank you for being so informative for parents, because they often don't know who to turn to. So it's good to have a good source of information.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, Elisa, again, thank you so much for joining us. OG family, Opportunity Gap family, and listeners everywhere, please be sure to check out the resources in the show notes. There's a lot of great gems in there. Until next time, take care, OG family. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julian. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks so much for listening today. We love hearing from our listeners. So if you have any thoughts about today's episode, you can email us at opportunitygap@understood.org. And be sure to check out the show notes for links and resources to anything we mentioned in the episode. This show is brought to you by understood.org. Understood is a nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering people with learning and thinking differences like ADHD and dyslexia. Learn more at understood.org. The Opportunity Gap is produced by Tara Drinks and edited by Daniela Tello Garzon. Our theme music was written by Justin D. Wright, who also mixes the show. Alana Milner is our supervising producer. Brianna Berry is our production director. Neil Drumming is our editorial director. Our executive directors are Laura Key, Scott Colcher, and Seth Melnick. Thanks again for listening.